I remember a meeting John was in with the president. It was a debt crisis time, a year and a half ago. And in the meeting, the bishop who represented the conference in that meeting, in a very powerful way, said, Mr. President, we're not, the text that obliges us to be here, that compels our obedience, does not say, as you've done to the middle class, you've done to me. Hearing what the White House always talked about. It says, as you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. And the president said, I know that text. And so we said, then we're asking you to exempt low-income entitlements from the sequester, which we believe is going to go into effect, and it has. Low-income entitlements, we said, exempt. And for an hour we debated that, as you recall. And they didn't agree to that, and an hour later they called and agreed to it. And then because of other conversations, some of the Republicans agreed not to oppose that if it happened, and so low-income entitlements are protected in the sequester. Not all but low-income entitlements are. And so I think the scriptures clearly say that the ultimate moral metric of the common good is how the poor and vulnerable are treated. This is the prophets say this is the test, this is the moral test of the righteousness, or we'd say integrity of any society, is how the poor and vulnerable are being treated. Now, who the poor and vulnerable are gets politicized by the left and the right, and they select who their poor and vulnerable are. But that principle is what we always bring in a meeting, the circle of protection, which was John's idea, by the way. In a meeting with one of the senators, gang of 8, I remember we had the meeting with them, and I said, now, Senator, you and I could pick the 12 senators who could find a path to fiscal sustainability, couldn't we? He said, yes, we could. Both sides, both Republicans don't agree. And they could protect our principle in the circle of protection of protecting the poorest and most vulnerable, couldn't they? He says, yes, they could. But then the interests would all come into the room. They come into your conference room all the time, and right. They demand their expenditures. And the poor would be compromised, wouldn't they? The senator said, that's exactly what happens. The circle of protection was there to say, we don't want that to happen. So the poor and the vulnerable finally are, I think, the test, the biblical test of the common good, I would say.
I would only add to that on the last issue of the poor and vulnerable, that we owe the problem this seriousness of study and sophistication. Robert Putnam of Harvard has a new book coming out where he analyzes this problem of stalled mobility. Mm-hmm. And he calls it, which I think is a vivid phrase, a perfectly purple problem, meaning that red and blue ideologies both have an important contribution to make the debate. So some of it is family structure and value structure and failed public education institutions, and some of it is atomized communities, essentially pulverized by globalization and technological change and kind of systemic economic problems. And if we're going to solve those problems, it's actually going to require a broad ideological framework in order to make it work. And so I would only say that I think a preferential option for the poor, I think, requires us to put their interest at the top when it comes to social priorities, and it requires us to take the problem serious enough for study. And there's a lot of people that need to make contributions in that area for it to work.